Good morning, everyone. Lovely to be able to speak to you again and to share with you. I hope everyone's okay back home, and I trust you're enjoying this lovely weather. Today's passage is Nehemiah chapter 2, and then we're going to go through that and talk about Nehemiah himself. So, Nehemiah chapter 2, let's just read some verses together from that chapter. Early the following spring, in the month of Nisan, during the 20th year of King Artaxerxes' reign, I was serving the king his wine. I had never before appeared sad in his presence, so the king asked me, "Why are you looking so sad? You don't look sick to me. You must be deeply troubled." Then I was terrified. But I replied, "Long live the king! How can I not be sad? For the city where my ancestors are buried is in ruins, and the gates have been destroyed by fire." The king asked, "Well, how can I help you?" With a prayer to the God of heaven, I replied, "If it please the king, and if you are pleased with me, your servant, send me to Judah to rebuild the city where my ancestors are buried." The king, with the queen sitting beside him, asked, "How long will you be gone? When will you return?" After I told him how long I would be gone, the king agreed to my request. And then a bit further down, from verse 11, it says, "So I arrived in Jerusalem 3 days later. I slipped out during the night, taking only a few others with me. I had not told anyone about the plans God had put in my heart for Jerusalem. We took no pack animals with us except the donkey I was riding. After dark I went out through the valley gate, past the Jackal's Well, and over to the Dung Gate to inspect the broken walls and burned gates." A bit further down, verse 16, "The city officials did not know I had been out there or what I was doing, for I had not yet said anything to anyone about my plans. I had not yet spoken to the Jewish leaders, the priests, the nobles, the officials, or anyone else in the administration. But now I said to them, 'You know very well what trouble we are in. Jerusalem lies in ruins, and its gates have been destroyed by fire. Let us rebuild the wall of Jerusalem and end this disgrace.' Then I told them about how the gracious hand of God had been on me, and about my conversation with the king. They replied at once, 'Yes, let's rebuild the wall.' So they began the good work. But when Sanballat, Tobiah, and Geshem the Arab heard of our plan, they scoffed contemptuously. 'What are you doing? Are you rebelling against the king?' they asked. I replied, 'The God of heaven will help us succeed. We, his servants, will start rebuilding this wall.'" The title is "When God Puts Something in Your Heart." So I've had the opportunity to think about it a little in terms of the occasions in my life when I felt so strong, something in the pit of my stomach, that gut feeling, that really strong urge that I needed to do something. And if you give some thought to that, I would dare say you could think of examples in your life when you felt compelled so strongly to take action. As a lad, I was just 9 years old, and I remember sat there listening to a speaker, and I remember thinking, if I don't stand up and step forward, if I don't confess my sins, if I don't say that prayer, then I won't be a Christian, and I can never be accepted in heaven. And I was 9, and I remember walking forward. I felt such an urge, such a strong conviction to get up and walk to the front and be escorted and counselled and somebody to pray with. And it was such a simple prayer. The whole process was designed for someone like me to be able to so simply come and to give their life to Jesus. And then a few years later, the same thing happened again. I'm lying in bed and I couldn't sleep, and there was something really, really pulling me. And I went to my mum and said, "Mum, I need to talk to you. I need to be baptised. I know I do. I know that I'm being asked. I've got to be obedient. I know that if I'm baptised, then I'm being obedient to God, and I want to do it. And I remember my mum got up and she phoned one of the leaders of the church. It was late in the night, and we had a conversation. And before I knew it, I was underwater. But you get the feeling, you know where I'm coming from. It's that strong urge, it's that conviction that you know you've got to do something. And I think as I've got older and I've experienced work and home and relocation, I can look back in my life and see where I've really felt that sense of I've got to take action. There's something in my heart that I feel that I need to act on. Sometimes we do, and it's the right thing. Sometimes we don't. And we look back and think, should I have acted? Should I have done something differently? But it's that sense of responding to that pull within you. Nehemiah had a heavy heart. His roots were from Jerusalem. I don't think he'd ever been to Jerusalem, but his fellow people had been exiled, and they'd been disobedient to God, and God had punished them, and the Babylonians had taken them as prisoners, and for many years they were exiled away from the city of Jerusalem. And in that time the city was now laying in ruins. And when Nehemiah was told by his brothers just the state of the city, it saddened him, deeply saddened him, and he felt absolutely compelled. He felt this real sense of needing to take action. The book of Romans reminds us that we are wired for hope. Yet there's something in our past that tells us we have to play it safe. It's hope that fuels the fire in our hearts, forms the foundation of our faith. Fear mustn't stop us doing the right thing and going all in on hope. And I was reading this some weeks ago. This that I've read there was something that I wrote down when I was having one of my devotions, and there's been a few things over recent weeks that I've gone back and looked over as a result of looking at this story. God has a plan. Jeremiah chapter 29 verse 14. I would say it's one of my favourite verses. That God has a plan, a good plan for my life, and he had a good plan for Nehemiah. That didn't necessarily mean lifting him out of his present circumstances. That didn't mean that it was going to be easy. The scope of the plan is the place that I must persevere and find surprising joy. That's what I wrote down at the time when I read this a few weeks ago. So God has a great plan for us, but it might be in our present circumstances, and we need to go through something and take action, and maybe we feel that burden, that desire, that feeling that we need to do something and to take action. Isaiah 43 says this, "Don't fear. I have redeemed you, summoned you by your name, you are mine." When I read that, I wrote this, "Take all the power that you give to fear and hand it over to hope." And so I think of Nehemiah in that position of feeling this overwhelming sadness and this overwhelming urge to respond to the feelings in his heart. He prayed. I discovered last night that by reading verse 1 of chapter 1 and verse 1 of chapter 2 that there was a period, I'm told, of about 4 months, which means that Nehemiah's response to that feeling within him, his first response was to pray, and not for 2 minutes, but over a 4-month period. He wanted to claim the promises that God had said he would give to his people if they confessed their sin and stopped their disobedience. And so he confesses his sin and that of his family and that of his people, and he appealed to God to open up a way so he could go back to Jerusalem and rebuild those walls. He was a man of prayer, patriotism, action, courage, and perseverance. And when you read through Nehemiah chapter 1, chapter 2, and chapter 4, and verse 4 of each of those chapters, and I think there are more, every time Nehemiah was in a situation, the first thing he did was to pray. Nobody wants a twitchy cupbearer. So if you're the king, you have a cupbearer whose job is to taste whatever is in that cup, wine predominantly. And if somebody's trying to poison the king, then it's the cupbearer that cops it first. So nobody wants a twitchy cupbearer coming to them sad, possibly with a bead of sweat on the brow, looking decidedly nervous. When you're in the presence of an emperor, then you should be joyful. I think that's what was expected. So to be sad was potentially a prison sentence. He hands a cup of wine to the king, and I wouldn't say being nervous or being twitchy was the most career enhancing situation he was putting himself into. The very worst, he could have been executed. And the third thing was, he was actually going to ask the king to reverse a decision that he had made some time ago. It was the king that said, leave Jerusalem in ruins, and now Nehemiah was going to say, actually, I'd like you to reverse that decision. Nehemiah must have felt fear. Any human would do in the presence of a man who, on the basis you were sad, twitchy, and you were asking him to overturn a decision that he'd made. And normally when a king makes a decision, it's like, it's non-negotiable. So I flicked back a few weeks ago and I remember reading the story of Peter on the fishing. And the Lord Jesus walks towards him on water. And they think it's a ghost, and Peter takes a look and he recognises who it is. And he steps out onto the water, aiming to walk towards Jesus and meet him where he was. And as soon as he stepped out the boat and stepped onto the water, Peter started to sink, and he cries out, Lord, save me. And the Lord says, you lack so much faith. Jesus knew that Peter was going to sink, but I think he wanted him to take the step anyway. And I really gave that some thought, because it's really scary when you step into the unknown. But that's where you find Jesus. Fear calls out the doubts. God calls out your name. And when he does, you must take the step and not hold back. And so when the king turns to Nehemiah and said, okay, you're looking sad, but you don't look ill. You're looking a bit twitchy. What's wrong? Nehemiah was smart. When he addressed the king, and he addressed the king very respectfully, he referred to Jerusalem in the way of the place of his ancestors, the burial place of his ancestors, which in Asian culture was held in great importance. So he actually said to the king, I've every reason to be sad. The place where my ancestors are buried is in ruins. But do you notice what he did before he actually addressed the king? He actually said a little prayer. Now I'm sure he didn't make that obvious to the king he was praying, but he said a little prayer. That really struck me when I read that, and I would have easily have missed that. So often we go into situations and we act on our instincts, we act on our gut, we have this strong compulsion to act and do something, but before we do, remember God is always present with us. And we can pray to him wherever we are, in the boardroom, in the factory, in the garden, in the car. Don't close your eyes. But we really can pray to God wherever we are. And even for a brief few seconds, Lord, help me. Give me the words. Help me to be strong. Lord, help. Or just help. Remember Moses. When God told him to go to Pharaoh, at least twice, it says he protested. Who am I? What do I say? Who do I say sent me? And God reminded Moses that when you've got all the power at your disposal, you don't need all the words. Trust God than trying to find all the words and all the answers. And I can spend an enormous amount of time trying to find the words. And there is a theme in this passage, which is about planning and preparation. So don't misunderstand me. We have to prepare, we have to plan, but sometimes we can overthink it and then not act. We can procrastinate. The thing was that Nehemiah and God were on the same wavelength. He regularly practiced spending time with God, reflecting, meditating, praying. And I would say Nehemiah's relationship with God was strong. So he was walking in confidence and enjoying the promises of God. And so just before he speaks to the king, he prays and then he speaks boldly. He asks for permission to leave. And he wasn't asking for a week off. He wasn't asking to be put on furlough for 3 months. He probably was asking to be allowed to go for a number of years. And I believe it was a number of years that he spent away from the king. He spoke boldly. He also demonstrated that he had a plan. So when the king asked him what his plan was, how long, what do you need? He'd spent 4 months praying, planning, preparing for this moment to act on his convictions, to have the courage of his convictions and to say, this is what I've been thinking, this is what I need. King, you're the one to make it happen. And the king gave him everything that he needed. He also made him a governor. And I smiled because when God delivers, he delivers way more than what we actually have asked for, because he knows what we need. And I wrote down here, this was a Joseph moment, because Joseph was betrayed by his brothers, dumped in a pit, sold as a slave, accused of rape, sent to prison, promised that by his fellow inmates that they would remember him, but was forgotten. And eventually, after this torrid journey, he stands before the king and he delivers an interpretation. And before you know it, Joseph is actually the second most powerful person in Egypt. It's amazing how God delivers through our circumstances. And so Nehemiah left with everything that he'd asked for and more and set off for Jerusalem. But I just want to keep going because I think it's important that we understand that when we have something in our heart and we need to act on it, that's just the start. We take that step and that is just the start. When Nehemiah got there, he found himself just surveying the situation. He had a very close confidant of people that probably knew his plans, but then he addresses the people. And I think this is, when I've looked at this, I kind of see some really good leadership advice and guidance. And for those of us that are leaders, then this is a great example of someone who addresses the people and he makes a case for change and he unifies the people into action. He appealed to them, their sense of dignity, their identity, their responsibility. He painted a vision of what the future could look like. He explained the success that brought him to this point. and they in return dedicated themselves to his leadership, and they executed his plan that he had prepared and organised and was now deploying. John Maxwell is an author, and if you've ever read his books on leadership, good. If you haven't, I recommend them. I had the real privilege of listening to him speak in London a year or two ago, and read one or two of his books, and have the Leadership Bible, which is also a bit of a recommendation from me. And here's a passage of John Maxwell's thoughts and comments on Nehemiah. Leaders who navigate do even more than control the direction in which they and their people travel. They see the whole trip in their minds before they leave the dock. They have a vision for their destination. They understand what it will take to get there. They know who they'll need on the team to be successful, and they recognise the obstacles long before they appear on the horizon. Sometimes it's difficult balancing optimism and realism, intuition and planning, faith and fact, but that's what it takes to be effective as a navigating leader. Above everything else, the secret to the Lord of Navigation is preparation. When you prepare well, you convey confidence and trust to the people. It's not the size of the project that determines the acceptance, support and success. It's the size of the leader. Leaders who are good navigators are capable of taking their people just about anywhere. Nehemiah also had to deal with opposition, and I think that's a valid point, that when we take that step, when we follow through with courage our convictions, we will face opposition. And he was confronted by people who accused him, scoffed at him, doubted him, tried to disrupt what he was trying to do. And I was reminded of something I read the other week when Samuel led the Israelites to victory over the Philistines. But initially, when the Israelites saw the Philistines, they feared and pleaded with Samuel to plead with God and to pray and to give them success. This was Nehemiah's Goliath, and I think we all have to face Goliaths, situations which we have to get through as we take this step, as we act on our heart's impulse. And fear says to us, do you have what it takes? Are you strong enough? But yet hope says, God is with you. Hope says, rely on God's strength, not yours. Nehemiah was confident in the sovereign hand of God, and that would bring him success. Verse 8 and verse 20. Nehemiah was a leader, a godly leader, and he took the initiative. He acted on what his heart was telling him. He prayed, he planned, he persuaded the people to act, and he pursued the product they all wanted, and in that order. What enables good leaders to initiate? Nehemiah demonstrates that leaders know something in their heart or in their gut that prompts them to move. They don't know everything, but they know enough to act. And Nehemiah knew that God's hand was upon him. I trust that something of that will bless you, challenge you, make you think, make you act, and to take that step. Thanks for listening. I'd like to say it's good to see you, but I can't. But you can see me, and I hope to hear from some of you very soon. So take care and have a lovely day. Thank you. God bless.